Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. We have a couple more folks that are just dialing in, so we'll get started in about 1 minute. Alrighty, great. Well, let's get started. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar using computer vision in regulated industries. We're very glad to have you here today. Just a couple housekeeping items. We will be recording this session and we'll send you a replay right after the webinar. If you have any questions, please type them in the chat box. And then we invite you also to join our community. We have a community of Landing AI users who talk about, share their sample projects, as well as we have a Q&A forum. So invite you to go to community.landing.ai. And today, very excited to have our speakers with us. We've got Quinn Kilo, who is our Director of Business Development, and David Park, who is our Machine Learning Solutions Engineer. And with that, I will hand this over to Quinn.
Great. Thanks, Elise. And thank you for the quick introduction. As Elise said, my name is Quinn. I'm with the customer-facing team here at Landing. I have been here for the past 4 years, working with our LandingLens users to help them bring computer vision solutions to production, primarily in the manufacturing setting. I've had a pretty heavy focus on both the medical device and pharmaceutical spaces. So this topic of validation of computer vision systems is top of mind for me, and kind of the reason we're doing this webinar today, to hopefully share some of our learnings with people who might be using LandingLens. I also have David Park here. David, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. Thank you, Quinn. Hello, everyone. My name is David Park. I'm a solutions engineer here at Landing. And prior to Landing AI, I worked as a data scientist for various AI companies, servicing multiple industries and verticals, including life sciences. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. Back to you, Quinn.
Great. Thanks, David. And jumping into it, I just wanted to cover the agenda first of all. So we're going to start off just giving a high-level overview of computer vision and some of the use cases that it can be used for in these spaces, just so we're all kind of on the same page here. Also, similar on the validation front, want to make sure we're all aligned on what validation is, why it's important for these types of systems. Then we'll jump into the challenges that we see around computer vision and validation, specifically in these regulated industries. We'll talk about kind of the different components of these machine vision or computer vision systems and how validation applies to those different components. And then, of course, we'll talk about LandingLens. That's the product that we offer, and kind of the solution that we're offering around validation and how it helps to achieve that in this manufacturing space. Finally, we'll turn it over to David here for a demo, and then we'll circle back and do some Q&A. So feel free to submit your questions as we're going through the presentation, and we'll try to jump in and answer those towards the end. All right. So with that, let's talk about computer vision really quickly. So at a high level, I think a lot of people are probably aware of this already, but computer vision is the concept of using deep learning or AI to analyze images and produce some sort of output. So we're using a machine learning or deep learning to look at these images and find something specific and give us a specific response. So what we've seen in these types of industries are a lot of different applications. A lot of them end up being some sort of camera on a production line or something similar that's taking pictures of products, and we're looking for something in those pictures on those products. A lot of that comes down to defect detection. That does not mean that we're only doing defect detection, but we do see a pretty heavy skew towards those types of applications. So everything from inspecting a medical device to making sure that all the components are there, that there's no defects, there's no foreign materials in there, to looking at finished packages and looking at the kind of quality of the print on those packages, looking at the integrity of those packages, making sure there's no dents or tears on the cardboard, all the way down to the kind of pharmaceutical applications where we're looking at things like pills or ampules for Again, various types of defects, cracks in pills, missing pills from blister packs, looking for inclusions in an ampule or a vial where we might have some foreign material floating around. All of these are typical applications that we're seeing across these medical device and pharmaceutical industries. And this is just a very small subset of the applications that we're seeing. Of course, there are many, many more, but just kind of wanted to get everyone kind of thinking about the types of applications that we can solve with computer vision. And that comes to the question of validation. I just want to, again, level set on what this is. It might be common knowledge for a lot of the folks on the call here today, but essentially what it is the FDA wants to make sure that the medical devices and drugs that are going out to consumers are safe and that they're going to work the way that they're intended. And the way they do that is to enforce different things on the companies that they regulate, the companies producing these products. One of those things being good manufacturing practices, or GMP. And basically GMP is it kind of goes back to what I just said. It's a set of rules or processes that these manufacturers need to follow to ensure that the products that they're producing are reliable and safe. One of the components of GMP is this concept of validation, which really means that we need to validate that any process, equipment, or materials are behaving and acting the way that they're supposed to. That includes any processes involved in the manufacturing of these products. So if we have a computer vision system that's looking at a component, we need to validate that system to make sure that it's doing what it's supposed to do reliably. And I think it's worth noting that this is a pretty broad audience that we're talking to. There's over 8,500 SROs just in the US alone, or significantly regulated organizations. A very large portion of those are falling into this bucket of medical device or pharmaceuticals, where validation is something that they need to be considering for any sort of production deployments of computer vision. So also wanted to talk about some of the challenges in these regulated industries, starting all the way up at product quality. So obviously product quality is always very important. It's even more important in these industries because any defect that did go out and made it to a consumer could, of course, endanger those consumers, which we absolutely do not want, and could also cost a lot of money. There's repercussions for these types of escapes, like corrective and preventative actions, or CAPAs, et cetera. So that drives a need for inspections. We want to be able to catch any potential defects before they do make it out to a consumer. What we've seen in the industry is that there are still a lot of manual inspections out there today, where they have inspectors looking at these parts manually and trying to find these defects or issues. And the challenge there is that it can be unreliable to do it that way, and also fairly expensive. A person's attention invariably is going to waver as they're going through an 8-hour shift looking at parts every day. So then that kind of raises the question, is there a way that we could potentially automate these solutions? And that's really where computer vision comes in, also LandingLens, our product. So now these customers, they want to automate these otherwise manual inspections using a software like LandingLens. That brings up the question of, can we do this in a compliant way? So we need to make sure that we're validating these solutions. And one of the challenges there is that a lot of these technologies today are cloud-based, or a combination of cloud and on-premise, as our product is, and we'll talk a little bit about later in the presentation. And that brings up some questions around this validation process about how we validate a cloud solution that could be updating very quickly. It's something that could be a challenge as those updates are happening. And a lot of that challenge is around cost and time. So it's an interesting statistic here. A validation for a software like this can be anywhere from 1 to 1.5 times the price of the software itself every time you do that validation. So if you're doing that validation very frequently, obviously it's going to be very expensive and also extremely time consuming. So we need to come up with a way to do it better. And that's really what our validation with LandingLens is trying to tackle here. As we go through the presentation, we'll dive more into that. So I also wanted to talk about the components of a computer vision system. So I mentioned on the previous slide that a lot of times it's a kind of combination of both cloud and edge deployment. This is really what we've seen in these spaces to be the most successful way of deploying computer vision models. A lot of people think of them as just a point solution that gets deployed to a manufacturing facility. So like a deep learning model, as you can see on the right here, running in the manufacturing facility that's getting images and providing predictions. But what we found is that having a connected system between the development environment, where we're actually training the models, and the deployment environment is the best way to kind of tackle these solutions. And the concept here is that you can train a model in the cloud using the images you've collected. You can deploy that model to your deployment environment, and then you can start running production images through it and getting predictions out. But you might find that maybe you're missing a particular defect category, or you want to improve your model. One of the best ways to iterate and get to a true production model or production ready model is to be able to stream those real production images back to our development environment, where we can then retrain the model and iterate on it and push a new model to production. So now we kind of have this concept of both a deployment environment and a development environment that are interconnected, and therefore we need to think about how that impacts validation. So of course, we need to validate the models that actually get deployed, whether they be on the edge or in the cloud. But now, because they're connected to the cloud environment, we also need to do the validation of that cloud environment. And that's really what we're aiming to talk about here today with our validation ready offering, is how we tackle the validation of this cloud environment. And I just want to throw in there, I've mentioned LandingLens a few different times. This is LandingLens is our product. It is a end-to-end platform that kind of has this connected pipeline that I was referring to. So we have the cloud environments where we do the model training. We have options for deploying to the edge, and then we also have options for deploying to the cloud and having it all be kind of interconnected. So it's this end-to-end platform for building, deploying, and maintaining these computer vision systems. A couple of points on this. It is a no-code environment, so we aim to have any skill level come into the platform and be able to build effective computer vision models without needing to be like a machine learning expert or a computer vision expert. It's a very scalable solution because it is a cloud environment. We can build up solutions quickly. We can train many models at the same time. We can monitor many models at the same time. And as I mentioned, we can deploy both to edge and cloud, and we have a lot of flexible deployment options as well. So would really encourage people to check it out if it sounds like something interesting to you. And I did mention this validation with LandingLens as well. So this is kind of the offering that we're talking about here today. Our typical product or LandingLens is it's a continuous or CI/CD process where we're developing and deploying new features to that cloud environment very frequently, sometimes as fast as every 2 weeks. But obviously that wouldn't fly for someone who needs to do validation on that environment. And therefore we created our validation ready offering, which essentially is a more controlled release cycle of our cloud environment, where every 6 months we're releasing instead of every 2 weeks. And along with that, we're getting a number of tools and packages to help speed up that validation process, which I'll talk about in some of the slides later here. So typically, I want to talk about like the typical validation process here. It can be a very lengthy one. We've seen up to 3 months, could be potentially longer depending on the system that we're validating and how complex it is. Also, if it is a new system that a user has never seen before, can be very challenging to create the documentation packages that are needed. So everything from evaluating the features that need to be validated and categorizing them into different impacts to production, to creating the IQ and OQ packages or installation qualification, operational qualification packages that can be hundreds of pages long depending on the type of software. Once all the documentation is created, they have to go through and execute those protocols, document their findings, etc. That whole process can be very labor intensive and take a long time, as you can see on this timeline here. So up to 3 months to get to production. And what we're claiming here is with our validation offering for LandingLens, we are reducing that work cycle for the user quite substantially, down to just 2 weeks, to really save them time and make things easier from a compliance standpoint. So wanted to talk a little bit about what our customers and users are actually getting with our validation offering. And really it's this prepackaged offering of all the things you might need to do the validation. So first of all is the validation documentation. So I'm not going to read through the entire list here, but essentially it's a group of documents that will help our customers to go through their validation process, so they don't have to write these documents themselves. And thinking back to that timeline that we were looking at in the last slide, a big portion of that was the actual writing of these documents piece. So we're taking that off the table for the customers. We will actually provide that package with each major release, so they can just go in and make any modifications they might need to and go forward with executing the validation themselves. With the validation ready offering, our customers get access to the kind of the more controlled environments of LandingLens, but they also still can access the latest features in our faster moving environments. So they get kind of the best of both worlds. If they want to do some R&D activities in our standard environment, they can, but anything production related, they can do in our slower moving or more controlled release cycle LandingLens. Along with that, they also get a staging environment for validation periods. So every 6 months, they still have to go through the execution of the validation. Once they get the package of documents, that execution is actually carried out in a staging environment where we don't impact production at all. And then once it's done, they can move to the production environment. And then, of course, administrative support. So a lot of times along with these types of engagements, we need to support from audit perspective, QMS audits, security audits, et cetera, filling out questionnaires, and that's all supported by our teams internally. And then, of course, we have our in-house customer success and validation experts to kind of help our customers along the path of validation and make sure that things go smoothly. So these are kind of all the things that we're getting with this new package that we're offering. And just to talk about kind of the timeline leading up to each of these major releases, or each of these 6-month releases, this is kind of a filtered down version of it, but essentially 8 weeks prior to the major release, the customer will get itemized release notes where we itemize all the changes into whether or not we think they need to be validated. We share QA testing documentation 6 weeks prior to the release period. And then the 4 weeks before, or the month before that major release, we give the users access to that staging environment that I referred to in the previous slide. And within that 4-week period, they can take the package documentation that we provided and itemized release notes, all of that, and essentially execute the validation. And what we've seen is that execution of the validation actually only takes about 2 weeks to complete. So they can choose whatever 2 weeks within this 4-week window to get that done. And then, of course, at the end of that 4-week period, the production environment is updated to the latest features, and then the users will operate in that new production environment until the next major release, which would be 6 months down the road. So in summary, you're really getting packaged simplicity with this offering. Everything's being handed to the customer to where they can execute validation very quickly and very easily. They're getting the domain expertise from Landing, and what I mean by the domain expertise there is really that we have domain expertise in computer vision, manufacturing, and this concept of validation. And we also leverage partners for this as well. So we have all the support we need to help customers in the validation process, and then ongoing as well, ongoing support after validation from our customer success team and our validation partners. I also want to call out some of the benefits that we see from the different personas within these customers. First of all, the QA production side, they're avoiding costly escapes and findings, and they're also limiting the downtime to their production line and maximizing time in production, of course. From an executive management perspective, of course, quality is important to everyone in the organization. So again, quality Innovation, this is another big piece. I think a lot of the folks that we talk to feel like they're kind of handicapped to adopt innovative technologies because of the worries around regulation. So by having an answer for this validation concept and kind of checking the box on the regulation mark, we found that people feel like they can now innovate and take advantage of this new deep learning technology in the manufacturing space. And then standardization is another big piece to call out here. We've seen a lot of AI teams or machine learning teams within these big organizations that are kind of tackling projects on an ad hoc basis. Each developer might have their own way of building or deploying these projects, and that's not a very scalable workflow. It's hard to repeat. It's hard to share best practices. It's also hard to validate. With LandingLens, we're kind of following a predefined set of steps that are easily documented to make that standardization and documentation easier. And then, of course, validation. We're offering this out-of-box documentation to really lighten the workload and ultimately get this time to validation from 3 months down to 1 to 2 weeks. So I also wanted to call out one of our customers that has used this environment, and you'll see a lot of similar messaging here to the previous slides. But we worked with a Fortune 100 medical device company that had a lot of concerns or questions around this validation concept, and we were able to get them on board with the validation-ready LandingLens. And with that, they were able to get to production in just 2 weeks rather than the 3 months that they were expecting. They were able to immediately jump in and start doing the validation with the package that we provided them, rather than having to learn the tool from front to back and write that documentation themselves. So it really reduced their time, and now they're able to benefit from the putting computer vision in production and getting the benefits from a quality perspective, reducing CAPAs, cutting costs, et cetera. So with that said, I'd like to hand it over to David now for a demonstration. So I hope that we can kind of solidify what this development of the machine learning model will look like within the LandingLens product to hopefully solidify this whole thing. So David, I'll turn it over to you.
Sounds great. Thanks, Quinn.
Stop sharing.
Perfect. So given the context around the importance of having a validation-ready tech stack in regulated industries, we're very excited to showcase our technology today. We want to make sure this is an interactive session, so please feel free to jump in and ask questions through the chat that Elise shared during the demo. So as Quinn mentioned, Landing AI provides a data-centric end-to-end computer vision platform that really empowers our users to tackle various use cases using our easy-to-use platform. And more importantly, we can do that without adding risks from a validation standpoint in a scalable way. To contextualize today's demo, we have a data set containing images of pills that are being manufactured. And we'll demonstrate how you can leverage deep learning to classify and detect defects on these pills while following good manufacturing practices. So this is the homepage of our platform called LandingLens. This is the cloud-based platform for model training with various deployment options. And we organize each experiment as a project, and the most recent projects will be listed here. But you can also access all the projects by clicking on the View All button here. To start a project, you click on this blue box here on the left side. And once you do that, you will see the 4 project types or 4 types of computer vision models you can choose from: object detection, segmentation, classification, and visual prompting. Just to quickly go over the different types, object detection is used for when you're trying to identify more than one classes or defects in an image. And if things like general location or general size of these defects is important to your business needs, or it's important to your business, object detection is the right project to choose. And if you need a little bit more precision, like pixel level precision when it comes to these defects, or if you want to calculate the size of the defects precisely, segmentation is the right project. Just keep in mind that the labeling process is a bit more laborious for segmentation models. So just keep that in mind. Third is classification. The simplest example I can give is if given an image, is this defective or not? So you're essentially classifying the entire image. So it's giving a decision based on the image in its entirety. Last is visual prompting, which is a novel approach that LandingAI recently released. The idea is to be able to provide a few sample pixels to the model, and we can learn from these samples based on color, texture of the image. We can create a powerful segmentation mask, and we have a lot of flexibility in terms of what we can do with that. You can kind of think of it as kind of the ChatGPT equivalent in the computer vision space. Also, as you can see at the top of the screen, we provide a guided user experience, and the user workflow will be the same no matter what project or model type that you choose. And this is very much intentional, so you can work on various use cases with the same workflow. For the first part of the demo today, we will create a classification project. I'm going to import our example data. And just industry best practice when you're working with classification models in data science, ideally you have each class or defect class in a separate folder, which is what we have today. So I will go ahead and upload the classified images and drag and drop these two folders. As you can see, we have two separate folders, one called good-no defect, another one called no good-defects. And as you can see, the good folder contains all the images of pills that are non-defective, and vice versa. And I'm going to click on the upload button now. The main benefit of doing that is we will not only upload those images, but we will also label them on each individual image basis using the folder name. So you don't have to label each image individually. But for whatever reason, if an image is in the wrong class, you can go into it and change the class or create an entirely new class on the platform. Okay. So now that we have images uploaded and labels are labeled, I can come here on the top right corner and click on the train button at the top right. Once I do that, you can see exactly what we're doing step by step. First, we are provisioning the necessary GPU resources to train a deep learning model. I think one of the questions on the chat was, hey, why should we have a cloud-based platform? This is the main benefit of having a cloud-based platform. Next, we are going through the model configuration and the actual training process itself, as you can see on step 2 and 3. And last but not least, we will calculate the model performance based on the ground truth or the label that you gave for each image, and present that back to you on the platform. This will take a couple of minutes, so I will skip ahead to a preloaded result. And as you can see on the right side, the model was able to achieve 100% precision and recall, which is really great. And below that, you can see what's known as a confusion matrix, where you can identify where the gaps are in the model, so you can iterate through the training process quickly, as Quinn mentioned. One feature that our users really appreciate for classification project is the defect heat map. So if I click on the toggle and click into an image, here you can kind of start to see and understand model behavior and why it made the prediction that it did, right? So higher the intensity of the heat map, higher the activation that particular area is has on the model. So you can start to understand why the model made certain decisions or predictions on an image and a pixel level basis. Right. Just want to take a quick pause for any questions. I guess the chat is disabled, right? So, okay.
Yeah, I'm
yeah.
monitoring. I don't see any.
Okay, great. We'll keep moving that. Okay. So moving to a different model type. Again, if let's say you have a classification model for this use case, but let's say the quality engineer comes back to you and say, hey, I need to be able to count the number of defects and and understand where the defect is located. In that case, we would probably recommend that you train a object detection model, which we can do on a separate tab here. So object detection, again, same mechanic in terms of training a model. You upload your images and you label them. But for object detection, you create these things called bounding boxes, where you essentially create a box around a class or region of interest, and the model will be able to learn from that to find these various defects. Comparing Landing AI to some of other computer vision platforms or open source algorithms out there, we've hyper-configured our models to be, again, data-centric, meaning we're not as data or label hungry as some of the other algorithms out there. So we only require a minimum of 10 images labeled to train a highly effective model. I actually went ahead and labeled 9. So if I were to label another one, again, using these bounding box to create the highlight the scratch, I'll have this pop up at the top saying, hey, you've labeled 10 images, now you're ready to train a model. So at this point, I can exit out of the data view or label view, and the train button is highlighted again. So if I click on that again, we'll go through the same process, provision GPU, configure the model, train the model, and spit out the model performance. Okay. Once the model is done training, again, you can see the performance. This is a relatively straightforward use case. So we were able to achieve 100% on both precision and recall. And you can see the confusion matrix at the bottom. And at this point, if there were any mispredictions or gaps, you can use the confusion matrix and filter down to understand where your model has gaps, maybe change the label or create better labels, retrain the model, and go through that that entire MLOps process using the confusion matrix for visual error analysis and model iteration. Now let's switch gear and talk about some of the deployment options. You can run predictions on the platform by clicking on the predict button, where you drag and drop a few images to run predictions on the platform. But if you're ready to deploy the model into production, you can simply click on the deploy button. You can create a name, an endpoint. Oops, I guess we already have a webinar. And once that is done, I can click on the deploy or the update deployment button with the new model. And once that is done, we will create a cloud API endpoint, which you can leverage to integrate into an existing data pipeline or an application. So if you want any kind of real-time inferences using a cloud endpoint, you can do that here. And we won't demo this today, but as Quinn mentioned, we also have an edge computing software called LandingEdge. So if you want to download the model down to your edge device and run inferences on the production line, we can also support that as well. This is also great for use cases that require high throughput. So let's say 20, 25, 30 inferences per second. We can accommodate high throughput use cases as well. Okay. So hopefully that's everything we prepare in terms of the demo today. Hopefully we were able to demonstrate that end-to-end package solution that is also validation ready for computer vision use cases for manufacturing and life sciences. So as you can imagine, with Landing AI, you don't need to be a data scientist or ML engineer to train a high-performing computer vision models using our platform that also accommodates flexible deployment options. Thank you, and I'll hand it back to you, Quinn.
Great. Thank you, David. And let me go ahead and share my screen again, just so we can wrap up here. And yeah, so great. Thank you for the demo. I hope that helped to kind of explain the type of platform that we're referring to here when we're talking about these computer vision systems. But I do want to just take a second to kind of summarize what we went through today. So first of all, computer vision, I think it plays a big role, or is going to play a big role in these particular industries, and can help to automate these otherwise manual inspections that are pretty common in today's manufacturing. We also need to be considering validation when we're talking about these computer vision systems, both from the development end and the deployment end, especially if we're talking about these interconnected systems such as LandingLens. And the burden of that validation does not need to be as big as people initially think it might be. With a validation package like what we're offering, obviously we can reduce that time quite substantially. So we hope that enables people to open up their innovation. And of course, that time can be reduced from 3 months down to 2 weeks. So again, very happy to have everyone on, and we can take a few questions now. And if there are any other questions that come up after the call, please feel free to reach out. Elise, I'll turn it over to you for the questions piece.
Sure, great. So we've got a question. You talked a lot about validation of the development environment. How do we validate the models themselves?
Yes, I think it's a great question, and definitely something to consider. I see that someone actually had responded to that question as well, saying we need to demonstrate that they perform as needed, but without modification to the data, and that's definitely true. We need a way to demonstrate that the models are catching the defects or things that we're looking for in a reliable way, with, again, data that is not modified. It has to be true production images. So one of the ways that we've seen it done is to create something like a test set, or we call it sometimes a regression set, where we collect a bunch of images of the different defect classes that are from production, and we'll feed it through the model and verify that the results are accurate, right? And that we're meeting our success metrics. So that might be some level of precision or recall. Oftentimes we want 0 escapes across a test set that covers all the different defect types. And we just also need to be cautious of kind of the representation within that data set as well, how many samples we have, because we want our results to be statistically significant. If we're only sending one example of each defect through the system and it catches all of them, there's not a very high confidence there on that output. We want to send multiple samples through. Of course, it's much more involved than just that. And I wanted to point out, have partners that can help with that validation piece of the models. It tends to be more application specific, but we do, if a customer is hoping to get more support on the validation of the model itself, we can engage a partner to actually help with doing kind of a turnkey system there. So great question.
Awesome. Let's see. We have, how do you achieve production ready performance from your computer vision model? How do you prove that? How do you prove that performance?
Sure. So getting to production ready performance, I think it's a lot of different prongs to getting there. First of all, data preparation is super important. If you follow us at all, you'll see we talk a lot about data-centric AI. So the whole concept there is making sure that the model that's being used to train the model, the data that's being used to train the model is as accurately labeled as possible. Oftentimes we're not dealing with massive data sets, so we can't count on volume of data to make up for the noise in the data. So if we only have 10 examples of a particular class that we're looking for, we better be sure that every single one of those is labeled accurately, right? Otherwise, the model's performance is going to suffer pretty substantially. Another common piece of advice that we give is to actually deploy earlier rather than later, and maybe deploy in a non-impactful way, like in a shadow mode, where we're looking at actual production images, but we're not impacting production in any way. And that can be very helpful to feed in actual production images and see how the model's doing and use those to tweak and tune the model, rather than what we've seen a few folks try to do is act in an isolated environment where they have a fixed data set that they're trying to get perfect performance on. They get to, let's say they spend 3 months perfecting a model to get to 100% performance in this lab environment. They then go to try to deploy it to production, and inevitably they're going to see that that production drops pretty substantially, because that fixed data set almost never is representative of the actual data in production. There's going to be these variations and changes in the images that you weren't necessarily expecting, and therefore not trained into the model. So deploy early, run in shadow mode, use production images to retrain those models. And again, that kind of really goes back to the connected platform where we have the development environment connected to that deployment environment.
Great. Someone asked, why do I need a cloud environment for development? And I think David answered that actually during the demo.
Yes.
Someone else asked, do you have any recommendations for selecting good use cases for computer vision?
Sure. Yeah, and just quickly on the cloud one, I know David hit on the model training. I think there's a number of benefits there, and a lot more vendors are offering cloud-based products. So I think it's worth talking about a little bit more. Scalability is number one, and I think we talked about that a couple of times, right? We can scale up pretty much infinitely with the cloud-based environment. It also means that we don't have to invest in hardware, right? Don't have to buy a GPU, don't have to buy a PC to do the development work in the first place. And then installation, there's no installation process. You simply just, if you have a browser, you can log in and use the product, which is great for ease of access and kind of evangelizing these technologies across companies. So it really helps with that whole concept of democratization. And then, Elise, sorry, refresh my memory on how to select the right use cases, right? Yep. So yeah, I think there's a lot that goes into selecting use cases. I think first and foremost, feasibility is the first thing that comes to mind. You want to make sure that it's a solvable problem, and then also that it is a problem that has a return on investment. A lot of times we've seen solvable problems that people go through and build solutions for, but in the end of the day, there was no return on investment, so it doesn't actually make it to production. So there's the first two things I'd look at: calculate the return on investment, and that might be based on repurposing people who might be doing an inspection. It might be based on the kind of cost of non-conformance savings that you're getting from the quality increase, et cetera. But it's helpful to get that number ahead of time so you can have confidence that the project actually will make it to production. But then on the feasibility side, it really comes down to, can we get an image of the thing that we're looking for? And can a person see what we're looking for in that image? If a person can't see it, there's no chance that we're going to be able to train a model, because the person ultimately needs to label the data. So it's surprising how often we do run into this situation where a user wants to find a particular defect, but there's not actually enough resolution for someone to label it reliably, and therefore we can't train a model to find it either. So image quality and being able to get an image of the inspection that you're trying to do is super important. And then other considerations from technical feasibility are also important to take into account. So like constraints on the manufacturing line. Can you actually fit this thing into where it's being installed? Can we integrate it with what we want to integrate with? Can we meet the throughput requirements, right? So can the system actually run fast enough to capture each of the products? Oftentimes we can meet a pretty wide range of applications in those different technical areas. To David's point during the demo, we talked about how fast we can run, but still things to consider as you're looking at these projects.
Great. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for attending. And thank you, Quinn and David, for the presentation. Again, if anybody wants to try LandingLens for free, you can get started at landing.ai. And if you'd like either a demo of LandingLens with your own use case, or you're interested in talking to sales, please reach out to us at sales@landing.ai. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.